trade paperbacks, lock into the
I am joined by the amazing Allison O'Toole, Dan Price, Andre Owen, Fred Kennedy,
Chip Zdarsky. Chip, thanks for coming.
What's up, folks? I'm your host, Konrad, on Wednesday Night Reviews. Very happy to be back with Keith Grachow doing another episode of My Sketchy Goodness. This is our 12th. Keith, how you doing tonight?
Good to be back. It's been a month,
Agreed.
Right?
Oh my God, yeah, it has.
Yeah.
You know what? A month's been a long time from your socials feed. It seems like you've rather been busy. What's been the last month, or what has you been up to in the last month or so?
Did we talk after Fan Expo Canada? I feel like we might have.
I think we did once.
And then I went to Rose City Comic Con a couple weeks after that. And so I had I got Konrad after that, so that's why we didn't have our bi-weekly. It's still lingering, so I may be coughing a little bit during the show. But yeah, so I've been working on a bunch of different projects, but also I had like a week where I was just not really able to do too much. But yeah, now I feel like I'm back in the swing. October is starting to, beginning or this weekend we'll be at Word on the Street in Toronto. And then I'm doing a bunch of book signings and shows throughout October and November and into December. So.
You know what? The last month has been actually really good. I've taken some time to sort of rest. The interview portion of the show has been on hiatus. I'm finally coming back. I did an interview last week, which I had a really good time on. I filmed some reviews Sunday. I released one for Keenan's books, which he sent me, which are all weird and funny and different. I've got 2 more to be released, and I've got another interview next Wednesday with Mark Maya for So-Called Living number 3, maybe 4, but I feel like 3. And you know what? I've been reading just comics. I've been able to sit and read comics. I got Avengers Twilight by Chip Zdarsky and David Acuna. I hope I'm saying his name right.
Daniel.
Yes, yeah, Daniel. Yes, yeah. And that was really cool and interesting, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think Zdarsky, because of his background, understanding sort of news and how that works, he was able to craft a really not fun, interesting world for the now aged Avengers to live in, deal with, and talk about. And in a
Twilight, got it.
Yeah, and without being too on the nose, talked about things like fascism in the government, control of social media, control of news, and like really demonstrated it, which I thought was cool in like the comic booky mastermind villain kind of way. But I liked it, so I ripped through that. I am starting Crave by Maria Lovett. I hope I'm saying her name right. Art stuff is fun and weird and creepy. If you have not yet read anything from Maria Lovett, L-L-O-V-E-T, whether you're watching now, in the future, or Keith, if you haven't, Google, find something, and go enjoy.
Okay.
Really interesting art. Yeah, like her stuff tends to be on the end of pretty, sometimes right into sexy. Like, for instance, they did a cover for Hustlers comic book magazine that's come out, but also their own series. Like they have one called Porcelina, Crave, as well as a bunch of other stuff. So really great artist. And yeah, I'm now, because I haven't been reading my back issue. I can't call them back. I haven't been reading my comic pile. I have gone to my comic book shop. I've collected all my comics, and like this is all the detective comics that I have to read. And I'm excited about this, and I love the covers and how they look. The graphic design on these is amazing. Plus the art, like incredible.
Who's the cover artist?
The cover. Good question. Let's find out. Raider variant cover. Nope. Cover. Evan. I am certain I'm saying this wrong. I'm going to say it anyway. Evan Cagle. Cagle.
Not familiar with that person either. So.
Same. Yeah, and you know what? It's been like, I think they've already done like 2 years worth of covers on Detective. And I mean, they're still at it. This is how behind I am. This is like a year and a bit of comics. But I don't know, like, as a fan of Mr. Freeze, getting that cover was just like, oh. So, yeah. But yeah, I've, so much.
Yeah, I've stopped reading mainstream comic books. I think I've said that before. I just read back issues now and, you know, try to fill in some of my runs. And now I'm currently like reading, you know, books that I think I'd mentioned, New Mutants, and I've been reading Tom Strong by Alan Moore and Chris Sprouse, and that's fun. Fun adventure, and Ultimate Spider-Man, and yeah. So I'm going back and just trying to get as much out of these books. You know, you spend money on them and read them once, and then you like put them in your collection.
Yeah,
I want to get as much out of them as I can. So I'm rereading them and, you know, looking at the art a little bit more of different perspective from where I was when I first read them. I think, right, seeing things a little bit differently. So I guess do you have any idea of what you want me to draw? What I'm doing? I have no idea.
Well, you've drawn Warlock for us. I appreciate some of the stuff you're working on. You can't show, so I won't worry about that. Would you mind trying to draw Tom Strong?
Oh, Tom Strong. Let's see, what would he look like?
I do have your Photoshop up on the screen, by the way.
Oh yeah, good. I can kind of. He's actually a really fun body because he's got like really cool shapes when it comes to the you know, like how wide his shoulders and chest are and how narrow his hip is, right? So he's got this some great chin, and his jaw is just this really, I wouldn't even call it, it's kind of angular, but it's more, everything's really just a little bit wider when it comes to
interesting.
The you know, the shapes of so it's a little bit Superman. It's got super super large biceps, and he's got like a triangle on his chest. And
growing up with Teletoon, this reminds me a lot of Johnny Bravo.
Yeah,
I feel like that's cool.
Yeah, he's got that kind of. I'm trying to remember his what kind of pants he's got. So he may have like, can't remember.
Oh, and they've like
the high boots and stuff like that. Something like that. Just
good memory.
Yeah, and then I think he's got like a belt of whatever. And yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is just off the top of my head, but the shapes are what stand out. I think the shape that's the thing about his characters. He's just got this really interesting shape that is kind of fun to draw. Yeah, exactly. See, I'm not that far off.
Like,
actually.
No, you're like nearly bang on. Like, that's wild.
So he's got his gun. Yeah. So, but what's really fun about this world is it's like Alan Moore is just great at world building, and so it's just this story that takes place. It's that alternate universe, alternate history where we the modern times are like kind of in the, I think it's like the 60s or no, it's more like the it's more like the 40s or 50s, right? Some parts of it are. Some parts of it are. They sometimes tell tales that are a bit in the future, and it's like the 60s. So it's not taking like Alan Moore doesn't quite like make it a modern story as much as he makes it more of like a mashup, kind of like what Batman Adventures did, right? Where it takes place, it feels like it can take place now, but it has a very stylistic Art Deco 20s, 30s, 40s vibe to it. And, this one has just I like stories that have like lots of like almost like a whimsical kind of adventure type of feel to it. And this book captured that really well. It's got a little bit of Alan Moore's like social commentary in the mix. Chris Sprouse's art is just so beautiful. I mean, he is just this, the way he uses line, with thick and thin. I'm not really that familiar with him. I've never met him before. I don't really know that much about him. I haven't really. He's one of those artists that I haven't really followed their career too much. I've seen him. I think I've seen Chris do some cover work maybe or some other stories, but I can't tell you off the top of my head what they are. But he made something tells me he's like a concept artist of some sort, and then he went into like the comic book world. I'm just guessing. I don't know. I have no idea. I just get that feeling from him. I've never seen his. It's not. You know how like some artists. There's some artists that I've been following their career since the beginning, and you can see like when they're in their 20s, they're good, but then they over their 30s and 40s. Lots of the X-Men artists that I've followed since like JR and or Chris Bacalo or like some of the Joe Madura, some of these guys that were on the books, and then you can tell it's like at the time when I first was reading a lot of their work, it's really exciting, but you look back on it on some of that earlier stuff, and because of the limitations of color, and they're still developing their skill. You're like, oh, okay. Would I remember them to be these great dynamic artists? And now I look at it with a bit more of a skilled set of eyes. I'm going, oh, their anatomy is a bit off here. It's interesting. Like they're or they're not consistent with their faces, or the way they spot blacks. You kind of go, well, and it's not. I'm not saying that's necessarily a critique of the work. I guess I think that it worked. It's just that when you see some of their later work, which is much more developed, you kind of you can see that they were just developing it, and now they've gotten a much better grasp on it now, right? It's not like
exactly.
You have an artist that comes out of the hatches from the egg and they're fully developed. It always, it takes years
if only
for these artists to get their. I mean, there's some artists like Mike Mignola, that I feel he was one of those artists that, the earliest stuff I've seen of his still seems really developed. And then he decided to like take that to a new next level. And that's what I think makes him stand out. Is same thing with Bill Sienkiewicz. It's that he kind of it feels like he was already there. Although his Moon Knight stuff, there's a little. I don't know if the with him. I almost feel like the process of printing wasn't really quite caught up with what he could do. Right, because when you look at some what Bill does on New Mutants and the color artist, it was Glennis Lean. I don't know if I'm pronouncing their name right. The color art. I mean, I think they did a good job with what they had, but there was you can tell there's a lot of like color. Blue.
Oh, okay.
Color, just. Even almost to a degree is like you kind of get a sense of like they were just trying to keep up with Bill's dynamic art style, and it's really I think he it's hard because he has such a very loose, organic, yet everything is there that needs to be there, and so it wasn't you can tell like it just didn't. Some of it was just not. Moon Knight. I'd have to go back to. I only had the black and white version of Moon Knight, but the color stuff in New Mutants, his work, or the team. You can. It's just there's issues with it, and I think it's the limitations of the. What printers could do back then with color, right? With the color plates that they had.
Yeah.
And now I think that, technology's caught up so that artists can really go do whatever they want to do. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, Tom Strong is like just a lot of fun. Anything that has a fun, whimsical kind of storyline to it, where the characters just feel like they're it's not too serious. It's mashups of like it's things that take place in other times and but yet it still feels modern and stuff like that. And something about that I like that feel. Same. There's a bunch of books like that. Like Bone is another one that has that kind of.
Oh God, yeah.
Feel to it. Leave It to Chance is another one by Paul Smith. So yeah, there's a bunch of that kind of stuff that it's always appealed to me. Any of that kind of very whimsical action adventure, light adventure, I guess is what you would call it. So
yeah, and I think too, especially with Tom Strong, like you were saying earlier, where the art in it, or say like you've enjoyed being able to watch different artists over their sort of career, and then when you've gone back, like with Tom Strong or with say New Mutants, and reread it, now that you've honed your skills, you're seeing things that are, like you said, the perspective might be a little off, the anatomy might be a little off. I think though that the fact that it's still like strongly in your mind and you go to it speaks to the talent of the artists that were working on the book, as well as obviously the writer. And yeah, I guess one thing that, because
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say one thing that I sort of found interesting and find interesting is one, the style of story, the style of time that Tom Strong seems set in. The new Batman animated series on, I think it's Amazon. Yeah, it does this. Even Batman the animated series from '91 did that, where it has that Art Deco, like the cars are too old for modern, but they have technology that is like, I love that style of world, I guess. Because yeah, you have the flexibility to tell the stories you want. And I believe I've lost my other point that I was going to make. But I have kind of a question. But you had a point you wanted to make, so go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say that when it comes to, I think what I was trying to say before, when it comes to like some of these artists where you can tell that they're maybe mistake isn't the right word. It's just that whatever they're doing isn't technically correct. And whether they did it on purpose or whether they didn't realize what they were doing, I'm not sure. It's a little hard to tell sometimes. But it, like for example, with John Buscema on Conan, if you look at some of the perspective he does there, some of those comics, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I think he did it enough times where if you actually like figure out where the perspective is, you look at it and go, well, how is it that these people are down here and these people are up here? It technically, it doesn't, it's not accurate, but, and this is where I think he knew exactly what he was doing, is that it looks better compositionally. It takes your eye, it's more dynamic, it takes your eye in a certain way. And I think that's the more important thing. And so I know I've heard other artists who say that they fudge perspective all the time. If you know what you're doing, if you understand how perspective works, and you're just basically going, well, technically, if I were to do this, like if you were to, sometimes it depends on how you look at it. If you're looking at it in the perspective of like what a camera would do, right? Which is sometimes a camera warps things in a weird way. And if you're, and if you're following that, if that's kind of your style a little bit, like you're imagining yourself like a filmmaker, and you're imagining, the artist is imagining themselves drawing in a way where you have really weird skewed perspectives, it works, right? If you know what you're doing, right? So you're fudging it, you're using that kind of skill where you know that the camera it's not what the eyes would actually see. So the camera is doing something different than what actual eyes would do. It just depends on what your style or your skill set is in regards to, Bill Sienkiewicz, again, like when he designs pages, he has like his whole thing is just about like super dynamic lines and shapes, making your eye do certain things, and it works really well for the most part. Sometimes it's a little chaotic, hard to follow. It doesn't always, you're not always going to bat 100, but
no one does.
Yeah, but he's doing it in a way where he's at least trying to push the boundaries of what you can do with composition. And I think that you break those rules knowing what you're breaking, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the terms I remember from when my partner was in art school that I enjoy is forced perspective, right? Like, now I might get this wrong, Keith, so do forgive, but by like in the camera, because I have my fist closer to the camera, my fist looks huge. Yeah. It's not that big, right? Like, woo. And so I always love playing with forced perspective and artists that could do really well and interesting work with that. But to sort of talk about, like you said, intentionally fudging perspective, fudging anatomy, anything in order to do that, one, hell of a skill. But also, I think the name is so well fitted to that because it's forced perspective. By making the thing look the way you want it to look, you are absolutely forcing people to see it the way that you need them to see it. Maybe not the way it would really be. Yeah. Well, you are going to town.
Yeah. Well, the thing about he actually I didn't pose him correctly. He actually has like a helicopter, like a monocopter or something. I'm just making a floating disc, but it's one of those things where, because you have limited space, right? This is like what you're working with, 11 by 17 or whatever you're working with. The things that are the closest to you are gonna they're going to potentially be warped, or they're going to be much larger. And like when you do perspective, like I'll actually bring up one of my perspective grids. So if you're like, if this is like say it's a 3-point perspective. So you're let's try to get this a little bit. So you can see here that these orange lines here, if you can see them, I'll actually make them blue. You see how they're.
There we go.
If I were to like, like draw something that was super, like the 3-point where it's kind of whatever's closest to the camera, it's going to be really warped. The lines are going to come at a real, like divergent path, right? Because it could be quite, depending on where the other points of perspective are. So you may have things that look really weird, and because of the way your eye works, you can't see it all anyway. You can only see the things that are in front of you. Your peripheral vision kind of blurs everything, right? So that's why it's really more of a altered vision. It's to draw, and there's some artists that will do that. They'll blur things that are closer to kind of give it that feel. But when we all have artists have different tricks to create like depth of field, to create things that would generally, if it depends on what they're trying to do. If they're trying to like copy real life, if they're trying to make things, if they're trying to make it like almost, as I said, like they're taking it, making it more fisheye or warped. They want it to, to have that kind of feel, or if they want things to be to make it work compositionally and whatever. Like, so there's all different things we can do with perspective where it's not real. It's not accurate as to what you would see in real life. But but also because of the way the eye fills in information anyway, it may do the work on its own, right? So there's all different things you can do as an artist to kind of either give it that feel, whether it's like blur, whether it's like a warp, whether it's making it so there's really no blurriness around the edges where everything is super sharply defined.
Yeah,
which that's not real, but we can make it look like that, right? You would see that you could see that in a like a high def, like when a camera does like high definition, where everything is like super. Where
crispy.
It gets exactly. It looks really crispy. That's also not real. Eyes don't work like that, right? So there's all different things that we can do as an artist. It's just whatever you are trying to do for the story you're creating, to make it so that the viewer gets what you're trying to do, right? So and the other thing too, the weird thing is that if you like when you think of like a movie like Into the Spider-Verse, where they play around with perspective, really warp and use all different styles of art, people's eyes get used to that. And so if you introduce it into your own stuff, it's not so jarring for them anymore because they've seen it already. They've seen that. Whereas if you're trying something that people haven't seen before, it may take them a while to get used to it. And so you have to be aware that if you're as an artist, if you're making everything, like if you're playing around with panels, if your panels are, let's say this is a page, and all of your panels are like this, you have to know what you're doing and make sure it works, that the eye goes where it's supposed to go, because it may be confusing for the reader It also may be too much, right? They may need a break, and it's it's something you have to think about. Or it may be something, the only way you know is if you do it and somebody goes, you know what, it took me about 5-10 pages to get into it, but by 120, by the end of it, I wasn't even thinking about it. It just worked. It worked for the story, right?
It's funny because the moment that you drew those lines on there to make those panels, my brain hated it, and as you started filling in the characters, I was so resistant to it because with all the comics that I've read, with it, mainstream stuff, indie stuff, all of it, I've run into so many books where sometimes they just let the art go, and like there's no paneling to it, but there's still, I don't want to call it paneling because I appreciate what I just said, but by having little scenes, say it's a fight scene, you have the two people squaring up, and then over here, punch gets thrown, someone grabs somebody, throws somebody. Because you sort of get the flow of what's going on in the fight, you don't actually need the hard panels, so you could just go. I'm more used to that, I think, and more willing to accept that than just like you'd laid it out where the panel work was really jagged and off kilter there. But yeah, it goes to show you like that sort of the iconography of the language of how you're showing images is so important. But yeah, like, I don't know, give me a couple pages of that. I'm sure I could start ripping through it, no problem.
Right. And it's got to work. It's got to be, you got to do it for a reason, right? And that's, I think, part of the, when artists, and I mean, I struggle with this, like a panel, if Scott McCloud, his brilliant, some of his brilliant books, how to create comics and stuff, but he talks about like how you use panels to pace, how to, create time, but a lot of this, because of us working digitally now, you can use a page much more efficiently. Because if you look at some of the older comic books, so let's say an old DC or Marvel comic, you'd have all of this white space, all of this, right, wouldn't be used because of the way that printing worked, right? Shifting of plates and stuff can cause, issues if you have, art that's too close. So I think that they would have this template so that it just made sure that you didn't have any issues here or here, here. But then if you look at more modern books, they basically they'll go right to the edge of the, I do this, I go all the way almost to the edge. And, now, and then of course you have bleed, right? Where you have things that are coming right off of, so bleeding off of, yeah, exactly. And so you can do that. And then the other thing you can do now with panels too, is that panels don't have to have a gutter, right? You can have them overlap. They can be right next to each other like this, like the thickness of the outline, could be pretty thin, or they can be thicker. That's your choice. You can have panels that go out like this, it doesn't really matter anymore. You can have circular, right? So you can do whatever you want, but the problem you're going to run into is if you don't know how people's eyes work, where their eyes going to go when they're, looking at a page, you're going to confuse them. And it's also, why are you doing it, right? Why do you need to like do all these types of different panels? Does it work for the story? Is it just, and I struggle with this. I'm always part of, I think my thought process is partially, I want to I want to keep myself engaged while I'm drawing. So I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. But it's also partly like, but I also have to keep in mind, I'm like, and also, how does this tell the story? Is this distracting the story? Is it necessary? And so as a part of, it's kind of, I think, it's the same thing some artists, they don't often take into consideration letterers, right? So it's that they put all this art in without giving space for to go. And that's something that, I think a lot of artists have an issue with too, right? So it's they want it's indulgence with their art, it's indulgence with the way they pace a story. They're not always thinking about how their whatever story that they're telling, does it work for the story? Are they doing it just because they want to show their art off, or they're doing it because they want to make sure that the reader is getting the best story possible for what they're reading, right? So.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like that makes me think of sort of two things come to mind in like vibrant ways for me when it comes to panel work. And like you said, why are you doing this the way you're doing it? And one of them is Alan Moore's Watchmen, where it introduced and held the 9 grid, the 3x3 grid, throughout the whole book. And then the other one is, it's not Cave Carson has a cybernetic eye. Or is it? Am I crazy? No. Live, Read Rich. Oh, no, that's not one. There's a comic book that exists, and it's the title is similar to like The Smartest Man Alive or something like that, and it's the person's name, because it's the person's name and it has alliteration in it, and then it's like The Smartest Man Alive or something like that. The book itself is so hard to read because the panel, it follows seemingly zero panel conventions. And so as a result of that, not only each individual page, but each like multiple pages therein can be read different ways and tell you different stories. Now, mind you, the planning that went behind that would be insane. And kudos to the creator. But yeah, it looks wild. I have a copy of it in the other room, or I should say my partner has a copy of it. And it is just, every time I open it to look at it, to be like, I can read this now. I've read enough comics. I know what's up. It always just, I look at it and I'm like, nah, dude, not today.
Yeah, well, you have to know your audience too, right? I mean, I think that if you are a first-time creator and building an audience, it's part of your choice if you make things more complicated than they need to be with your storytelling. I've always had the mantra of like, I try to make it as, the story is the most important thing. It's not my art. It's not the words. It's the story. So I always try to keep that in mind, where I'm like, okay, I don't need to be super clever and indulgent here. I want this to be clear, and I want the most people to be able to read this. Now, as I've gotten, I've done more and more work, some stories call for more complex storytelling devices. And you do it for a reason, but it's a challenge as an artist to see if you can do it too, right? It's kind of both balancing both of making it for as readable as possible, but at the same time you're trying to do things that are difficult to achieve, right? Like the Sasquatch story I did, where it was. Let's see if I bring that one out.
I hope so. A little bit of shameless self-promo all the time, especially because we can see cool art, man.
Oh, wait. That's right here. Yeah, so one of the things we did, Mitch Cook and I decided to make this a mainly silent comic, which, we cheated a little bit. There's a little bit of this and some sound effects. But, there's a lot of miming and having to big acting to get the point across without having words, right? And that's something. And then creating this is a much more painterly rendered book, so that most if you notice here, a lot of it's all bleeding with the panels in the middle. And so part of that is I wanted it to feel big. I wanted it to feel organic. And, I wanted to try to challenge myself with doing things that, where there's no dialogue really going to be associated with it. So you have to figure out ways to make it work using symbols. And so for me, I think I'm at a stage in my career where that's, I still want to tell a good story, but I also want to, I guess the word would be indulgent, right? You want to it's okay to be a bit indulgent as long as you're being indulgent, right? Like I have a story I'm working on with Howard Wong, and it's super indulgent, super indulgent. We made that from the beginning. We're like, this is going to be super indulgent. We know it. And so, whether the reader, it may be a very narrow audience that likes it, but we're doing it. I think it's the story.
Yeah.
It lends to the story, but so we didn't come up with like, let's do the super indulgent story. What's that going to look like? It was more like, this story feels like it would be really super indulgent. So let's lean into it. Right. That's kind of what it was. It was like, this is what this story feels like to us. Let's push that as much as we can. And, whether it's going to work or not, we'll see. But, it's a challenge, right? It's doing something different that you haven't done. And, you're hopefully you've got enough readers that'll go, okay, you know what? I'll try this. I'll go for it. I may not, it may not be my thing, but I trust you that you're going to tell me a story I'm going to enjoy. Right. And that's kind of, so. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
There's some, I think we talked about Avengers Forever, the Kurt Busiek, Carlos Pacheco book, the 12-issue miniseries that came out in the late 90s, early 2000s. We've talked about that one. And that one is super indulgent, but it needs to be. It's a time travel story it's a time travel multiverse story that requires lots of characters, lots of world building, and lots of exposition. And so there's a lot. You have Kurt Busiek, who he can write sparsely. He's not super wordiest writer, but this was really, really wordy. And then Carlos Pacheco, who I've seen work that he's done that isn't necessarily, he loves world building, but it doesn't necessarily need like super huge amounts of characters in them. But this one did, like, it was loaded with it. And it took me a while to read a 24-page comic. It would take me double the amount of time because it's lots of words, lots of image in a little space. And you have to really mentally prepare yourself for it because, it's not like the opposite is like Walking Dead, where you can go through an issue or even one of those collected volumes in like half the time it takes to read a comic normally, because it's just, that one is indulgent in a different way, right? Like it's just it's very it could be very meandering sometimes in a way that built up suspense and horror and built up characters sometimes, right? And I think it worked beautifully for that. But, that one is like almost the polar opposite, with very little words sometimes, and you can have pages where there's like very little said, but it's a lot happening, right? Or little happening, but moving the story along, right?
So, stuff like that too. I don't know. Not that I feel negatively about it. I'm not sure how to state how I feel about it, because for me, like an average comic, right, like this one will take me about 30 minutes to read. Because one, I am a fairly slow reader. I read every individual word. I don't skim read, anything like that. So I'm very intentional in my reading. And because it is so much art, I'm fairly intentional in how I am taking it in. And what I find is when I run into a comic where, like you said, I have to mentally prepare myself going in to go, hey, this is going to be dense, or, whatever kind of difference it is compared to the vast majority of books. I got to get ready for it. I find for me, I'll hit the end of that book, and then I'll have to go, okay, hold on, go back, go through it again. Like with The Walking Dead, for me, it was a lot of, did you catch everything? Because like I got the heart of what it was saying, I got the emotion out of it, the tension. But it's like, wait, did you actually like take in all the art? Because like you can lead through that real quick and not notice all the little details that someone spent hours on, and you read it like that. Or if something's too wordy as well, like there's been Justice League books, X-Men books where, you know, the artist on the book has taken God knows how long, especially like Justice League, to draw the Watchtower, and like here's our main cast of like 12 characters, and then like here's all this random stuff in the background, and I'm like, I feel that I need to take the time to understand what was put in it, to really check it all out. I also love looking for Easter eggs and just weird stuff. So yeah, like I find books like that will slow me down significantly just because it's, did I rip through it too quick? Did I miss something? Did I, you know? But yeah, I think a huge thing that we sort of been touching on today so far is just the way that you communicate through your art and the symbols of it, just making sense and being readable. I think that's the biggest thing. Because I think people's minds are able to wrap around a lot of really complex, weird stuff. But if you're not consistent in the way you're feeding it to them, all of a sudden you'll lose them. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. But part of, I think there's a beauty, as I said, going back and rereading stuff because, and I eventually, I think my goal for the next 20 years or 30 years or whatever, is I'm not, as I said, I the only things I collect now, I'll collect an indie book from friends, and every once in a while I'll pick up like something new that somebody's like, oh, highly recommend you pick up. But I have such limited space, it's hard for me to really do that now. So my thing is, I'm rereading everything and I'm going, you know what? I like this, but I don't really need to read it ever again. And so I can then go, I've read it twice now, and I've read it in different times in my life. And it doesn't have the same appeal that it did when I first read it. Or I just read it, didn't even think about it, put it away. And then, you know, when I reread it again, I maybe like, you know what? I know why I liked it initially, but it's just not something I would ever want to see again. The art isn't hooking me anymore. And so, you know, there is something to be said about whittling down your collection and then getting to a point where maybe you have such a small enough collection that you can go back and reread them or appreciate them a little bit more because you have the space and you're able to I'd love to be able to reread Walking Dead. I've read it almost twice, I think. I've read it some of it twice and some of it only once. But, you know, I would love to go back again and reread it because I just love the character development, and it's such a great, it's a scary book. I think this is one of the few books I've ever read where I'm like, this is really, I don't know if I can keep on reading this because it's really freaking me out, right? It doesn't happen all the time, but that's one of those books that does. And so I would like to be able to have
I think too, it's like I think it's important to note too that The Walking Dead being a horror book, I find it so hard to do horror in comics as a reader because if you do not absolutely hook me with the writing and the atmosphere created by the artists, I can just page turn, right? Like it's easy to just go, oh, okay, that's what happened. And like, yes, you could absolutely put like a big scary monster on like the third page or whatever to like, jump scare somebody. But otherwise, you're not really in control of the tempo. You're not really in control of how fast or slow someone takes something in. There's no music to it. There's no voice acting. You can't force that urgency. And so, like, for me, like, when I picked it up, because it's black and white, that the originals were, it felt creepy, and not a lot of comics were doing that at the time. And the art style itself was just dirty. And yeah, it created such atmosphere that I found myself like really stuck in it. And it was like, okay, cool. This is like something. And yeah, like the power that they had in that book was awesome to just totally draw you in.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's really hard to do horror. It's really hard to do comedy. Like it's action and drama I think, are probably the easiest to do. I mean, action really mainly is the easiest to do because it's such a visual thing. Whereas comedy is the way timing works in comedy. A lot of it is like a bit more, unless you're doing like full on slapstick type, like gags and stuff, having something. Yeah. I was just coincidentally, I was reading one of Bendis's The Ultimate Spider-Man, and I love that series. I like absolutely some of the best Ultimates of any of the Ultimate stuff that came out, and I find that he's very indulgent when it comes to his dialogue. Like he loves writing, like it works, but he loves like putting in those little filler words like and
yeah,
making it as if you're actually having a real conversation with people where you don't have your sentences aren't necessarily the sentences themselves. You may almost start in the middle of the sentence because people don't always start at the beginning and go to the end, right? People interrupt each other, and so you don't always get to finish a thought. I think he does that kind of stuff really well, and he tries to be humorous, and it doesn't always work, but when it works, it's really funny. And I don't normally laugh out loud when I read comics, but with his books, I will. Like he'll just throw, Spider-Man will throw out one of those one-liners, and it's just perfectly timed. And I think the reason why, and this is where I think this is why horror and comedy don't work in comics as well, or it's harder, is because you have to be indulgent. And what I mean by indulgent is that you have to, when it comes to the economy of the cost of something, the cost of the art, cost of the printing and all that stuff, there's a reason why you have 20-something pages normally for like a floppy. It's because of the cost you paid an artist, cost of the writer, cost of the team that's creating it, cost of the printing. So you only have a limited amount of time to tell a story. And when you have somebody like Brian Michael Bendis, who basically he will take full 3 or 4 pages of people talking, and there's not necessarily a lot of action happening.
Yep.
And and they're just talking to each other about like things that happened during their day. And Peter Parker would be like, "Am I going to do this? Okay, I'm going to do. Why am I doing this? This is crazy for me to do, right? Is this crazy to do?" This is like one whole page of him humming and hawing about whether he's going to do something while he's in his bedroom, and that's indulgent because that's money. That's the time and cost for an artist to do and to print out. But because he's such a great writer and because his books sell, they allow him to do it. So if you look, I think one of the things about his books, you look at some of the Ultimate Spider-Man stuff, it really works well, but there's not a lot that happens in each issue. It's almost like, there is action and it feels like you're getting a lot of action, but it's not as much, I bet you, if you look at other things, other books that were other, like Stan Lee books, which were like almost, just back to back, very quick,
exclusive, just boom, 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 yeah.
So that's where he has the ability to kind of make you laugh because he can really build up to it, right? He has that time, the timing to do it, right? Whereas if it's a straight on action comic book, you don't always have that time because you kind of get to the one thing to the next thing there's so much happening. And the other part too, because Ultimate Spider-Man was its own thing, he was able to build from scratch, and he had that luxury. He didn't have to worry about all these other tie-ins with other stories and other characters and stuff. He can kind of do his own thing. So that allowed him to be that indulgent too. So it's the same thing with Walking Dead, but on the flip side with the horror, because it wasn't connected to another universe, because he could kind of take his time with, building it up, and they allow, and I think because Image, eventually people were like, I want this. He was able to get away with making some of these stories really just a slow build, and then lots of action, people dying. Oh my God, I can't believe it happened. And then slow build for issues. And you're like, nobody's died. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen at some point. And that's building suspense, right? It's
exactly,
know when it's going to happen because he doesn't have to follow a formula of like by the end of the issue somebody's got to die, right? He doesn't have to worry about that. He doesn't have to have a certain kind of template with each issue, and that's not always,
he just does what feels good.
So that's how some of these books can get away with it if they have that indulgence to be able to build up, spend pages. Like one of the things I thought about with horror, I think I've talked about it, if you have like a panel where somebody's standing reading something and behind them you just see like what it looks like a silhouette of a tree branch, and then you just have the same thing happening for 6 panels, and then 7th panel all of a sudden you notice that tree branch is gone, and it's like, oh crap, was that an actual tree branch or was that somebody standing there like behind that person this whole time? It looked like a tree branch because it was silhouetted. But then so that kind of stuff, that's a whole page that you just spend doing that. Right? You can build up suspense that way, build up horror that way if you wanted to. Humor as well, right? That's that's a kind of an exciting thing for a creator to be able to jump into if they want to really jump out of like the whole this is normal action, something has to happen within 24-page story.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think too, maybe for comics in horror, the idea should be to go and sort of copy the pace rather of Alien, like the original Alien film.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I remember watching that, like I think the first time I watched it, I was I was 20-ish, and I looked up the runtime and I was like, oh my God, this is such a long film. And like a lot happens, but not a lot happens. It's just tense the whole, like once the alien stuff starts happening, it is just tense. And yeah, I think there's something real special to that. And maybe that's the way to try and lean into it with comics. Because yeah, I like with that, to me, and I don't mean to bash anyone who's into horror, but to me, if you took out a jump scare or gore from most horror films' tool belt, they would be kind of not great films. But yeah, it's interesting. That being said, Keith, we are like 40 seconds from the hour. My God.
It flies by, doesn't it?
Time just flew. Oh my God. I did want to quickly shout out, Paul commented about 4 minutes ago. It's always great to see your show is live when I get home from work. Paul, thank you for tuning in. Happy to make your evening a little better, bud.
Yeah, he's our my dad as well. I know my parents are on, my mom and dad were on as well. So.
Oh, yeah. Over on the Instagram side there, I could see him. Kevin, do you mind if we keep you for just a second, Keith?
Sure.
Keith, Kevin Manklow of Mad Cool Comics has a question. So I'm curious because I know Kevin to be quite the artist.
Yeah. We know Kevin.
Right on. While we're waiting for Kevin's question, Keith, are you going to be at Wayside Creator Con on the 27th?
Yes, yeah. So I'll be there
Cool.
amongst a bunch of other amazing creators. I'm excited. Omar's put a lot of work into it. So yeah, we're he's doing it at a brewery, and so it'll be interesting. I haven't done an event at a brewery in a while. So this will be a fun one. And then just while we're talking about events, I'm going to be at Nerdcore October, I want to say the 5th, the Saturday. I think it's Saturday the 5th. It's the next, just want to double check that. Anyway, it's it's the 5th. It's their 6th anniversary, and they're in Hamilton. It's a great little comic, or it's a great, I shouldn't say comic shop. They're a fan, like collectible type of store. They have comics, but they have all different really cool things like homemade T-shirts and things like that.
Oh, cool.
So they're really it's a great shop to go to, and I'll be there. If you've got kids, I'll be doing like free sketches and stuff like that for their anniversary. So that's on October 5th at Nerdcore in Hamilton. So hope to see people there for that. And did we get the question from
that's so sweet. Yes, yeah. Kevin asks, what comic book has the best balance of story action and story suspense? Oh, that's a good one.
I would say Walking Dead.
My brain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
that's where
I find. I think it would be light on action, but for me, I found Infidel to be very suspenseful, and it doesn't have like some sort of axe killer or anything like that. It has a lot to do with ghosts and the supernatural. But like when stuff happens, like it actually had me pulled in really well, and I felt like it was a creepy book to read. So maybe that's a bad answer because there's not a ton of like action, but like when stuff went down, I was in. So yeah, for me, I think it's Infidel. The Walking Dead very much, I think, does it well.
is another one that does really good action and like horror action type stuff. That's the Hellboy team. That he ended up leaving it after a while, so it was just like Ape Sapien and anyway, that's another one that comes to mind. That was I didn't finish that run, but I read a good, like the first 100 issues or so. It was very good.
Ooh, awesome. Well, Keith, on that note, we are a bit past the hour, but it was awesome to get to hang out with you again, chat comics, see Tom Strong drawn, and an insane background. We can't leave that one out. Yeah, Keith, thanks so much. It was awesome to hang out with you.
Yeah, it was good to hang out. Thanks for everybody who came out, Kevin, Paul, my dad, my mom, whoever else was out there. So much appreciated.
Absolutely. And folks, once again, real quick, October 5th and or 6th, the Saturday.
That's the Saturday.
5th, the Saturday. Go check out Keith at the store's name, Keith?
Nerdcore in Hamilton.
Perfect. Love it. And well, if nothing else, we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2? Nah, collector problems. Cliff.